Today we're going to talk about listen to life, how wonderful life is. Dion McInnes states he was a photographer at 6, a writer at 12, and a poet since birth. He started his professional life as a freelance writer and photographer and then served 4 universities over 27 years in fundraising, alumni, and external relations. After 13 years as the Associate Vice President for University Advancement at University of Houston Clear Lake, he embarked on empowering people in their creativity, and he is now the president of the Empowered Creativity Institute. Please make welcome Dion McInnes.
Thank you, Becky. Isn't life wonderful? Indeed. I mean, I just watched as y'all came in and you look for each other and you seek each other out and you share stories and you learn from each other and you laugh with each other and you hug each other. But life hasn't always been perfect. Life is wonderful, especially when we listen to life. When we listen to life and learn from it and gain from experiences, we've all heard the Buddhist wisdom, right? That says when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. But if you go into life listening, if you listen every day to the stories around you and listen to your own stories, in fact, you will have teachers every day. My mom was a wonderful woman. She had this one tidbit of advice in particular. She had millions, but she had one tidbit of advice that in particular has carried me through for many years. She said, "It's just a phase. It's just a phase." Now, guess which time in my life I heard that the most? When I was a teenager. And she would look at me and shake my head and mumble, "It's just a phase." But we use that expression a lot, she and I. And she helped me understand that if things are difficult, it's just a phase. Likewise, if things are great and you think you're on top of the world, guess what? It's just a phase. Okay? So life is wonderful as we pick up these expressions and gain wisdom, and we're able to combine information. I did a presentation at my old alma mater, my high school, Strake Jesuit. I did a presentation earlier this week, and my topic at Career Day was consulting. Even though I spent 27 years in higher education and 12 years as a freelance writer and photographer, my current role is consulting. And I shared with them that the message really of a consultant is to say, I have all this knowledge and wisdom, and I will tap into as much of it as possible to help you find a solution to your issue. But we do that by going where the action is if we want to make a difference. You want to make a difference in your life, you go where the action is. You're showing up right here. You might go to the health fair. You do different things by going where the action is. Well, there's a story that I use about that to help other people understand how to make changes in life, at work, at church, at home. My youngest son was about 9 years old, and we were on a family vacation in Corpus Christi, Texas. And back in those days, Pokemon cartoons were a really big deal. And Pokemon cartoons involve good characters and evil characters. And each of the characters have characteristics. And the kids would learn all those characteristics, what the strengths and weaknesses were. And they had these cards where they knew them, and they could play these games of who would beat who based on these characteristics, strengths and weaknesses. So here he and I are out in the waves. I've got my arms behind him. I'm holding him so he can kick the waves. As each wave comes to the beach, he was going to save Corpus Christi, Texas. Thank you very much. I'll tell him you appreciate that. He was saving Corpus Christi, Texas. Every wave had a name. Well, this went on for a while as I lifted him and tossed him and he kicked each wave. And after a while, Daddy's getting kind of tired. So we go to the shore. I said, buddy, we got to go to the shore for a bit. And so we go to the shore and we're standing there for maybe, 3 or 4 seconds. And he says, Dad, what are we doing here? I said, well, buddy, I'm a little tired. He said, but Dad, how can we save the world if we're not where the action is? Listen to life. I looked at him and smiled and said, buddy, if you only knew how big that was. I have used that with volunteers. I've used it with my family members. I've used it with teams at the universities. I've used that in motivational speeches. I've used it in coaching. If you want to make a difference, go where the action is. And where did that nugget of wisdom come from? A 9-year-old talking about cartoons. Listen to life. And once we decide that we want to go where the action is, we have to start doing things. Okay? We start looking at what are we going to do in terms of the decisions we're going to make. Now, Becky mentioned that I spent 13 years at UH Clear Lake. I've spent all my life in Texas except 4 years in Albuquerque, New Mexico to work for an amazing human being. And I was lucky and I ended up working for 2 amazing human beings. But the call to come home was strong. It was time to come back home to Texas. And so I'd been on several job interviews, and I interviewed here, and they put me up at the Hilton so I could look over Clear Lake, and I could think of the days that my dad and I used to fish there. I was home. I was home. And I was excited, but then I was nervous because I had a counter offer at University of New Mexico. We were developing a life there. The kids had a life there. I didn't know what decisions to make. And so at one of the interview stages with the university, it started out with a video interview, actually. I sat in at a Kinko's in Albuquerque, and I got on the camera, and there I'm looking at a screen with an empty room. I thought, well, this is a tough start for a job interview. And it's an empty room. And then here comes Missy. She's looking in. Are you Mr. McInnes? I said, yes, I am. Okay, we just had a fire alarm. Nobody in the room. I'm going to keep you company, but we'll be back in a minute. So she comes back a minute later and she goes, Mr. McInnes, are you still there? I said, yes. She goes, they take fire alarms really seriously here, so I can't stay with you. I'm going back out. We're going in the parking lot. We'll be back. So the short version of the story is that the committee came back. We completed the video interview. It went well. I was invited to campus. That's when I stayed at the Hilton. That went well. And then I got the job offer. Decisions had to be made. And I've always shared issues and topics with my sons. And so I was sharing with my middle son at the time that I really didn't know quite yet what to do. The salary offer wasn't exactly what I wanted, but the community was. And, back and forth and finding new schools and all these things back and forth. I said, I sure wish there was a burning bush. And guess what he said? He said, Dad, didn't that interview start with a fire alarm? I accepted the job offer and worked there for 13 years. Okay. So, again, you're listening to life and listening to the pearls of wisdom from everybody around you. In fact, that 9-year-old son kind of punctuated the deal because my middle son and I were in the U-Haul trailer. We were in the van, we were in the driveway ready to head to Houston. And my youngest son runs out and he hands me a little Ziploc bag full of Bermuda grass from the front yard. I thought he was giving me a sample of Albuquerque to take home. Take to my new home. I said, buddy, thank you. What's this for? Well, Dad, this way you can see if the grass is really greener. Wow. So again, we listen to these things and we understand how wonderful life is and the kind of input we get if we just listen to each other. And sometimes the things that happen we don't even notice, but we still need to listen. In my first job at the University of Houston, I started in 1987. In 1985, the Houston economy was in the toilet, and I was a freelance writer and photographer. I went through 500 phone calls, letters, cold calls, telephone, all these things trying to find a job. 500 of them. And then I got the job at the University of Houston, which is my alma mater. But I'm in the School of Engineering. What do I know about engineering? I'm a journalism major. And here I am in the engineering school as a writer and photographer. And back home, I got 2 kids and a mortgage and a lot of debt from the photo business. And I was hoping I was going to get this right. And in these times where you've gone where the action is and you're making a difference and you've made these decisions to start new adventures, you're still nervous. And I was in the dean's suite area working on some documents, and the dean came up to me and touched me on the shoulder and said, "You're doing a good job. Keep it up." That simple moment. All the pressure disappeared. All the worries about money and being able to make it disappeared. And I knew that I would be okay and I would be able to take care of my family. I had dinner with Roger probably around March, just a couple of months before he passed away. And I shared with him that story and how important that story was to me and how I've shared it in team building programs. And he smiled and said, "I don't remember, and I had no idea." I said, "I understand that." But that simple gesture made this young man know he would be able to take care of his family. Well, that's not just an experience, that's wisdom. Listen to life. How wonderful life is when we support each other. I shared that story at a workshop I did at NASA for women managers. And one of the women said, "You know what?" She said, "When I first got into aerospace, I was one of the few women working in aerospace. And she said, early on, my manager came up to me and said, 'You have what it takes to be a manager if you want to. I'll help you get there.' She said, 'So I understand your story about your dean.' I said, 'Well, that's great. And you made it into management.' I said, 'When is the last time you said to somebody that you have what it takes and I'll help you get there?' And her jaw just dropped. She had experienced life but not listened to it and how to use that and use that to help others. So when we do that, we listen and we learn and realize all the things that help each other, because it is a wonderful life and we want to give everybody opportunities. As we encourage people, we're going through life, and like I said, we make difficult decisions. And we make decisions that matter in the moment, and we make decisions that matter over the long term. One of the best pieces of advice I got about making decisions and thinking about issues came from Father Mulvihill. He was at Strake Jesuit, and it was sophomore year, 1972. You can only imagine what everybody wanted to do with their hair at that time and what was on everybody's minds at that time. And Father Mulvihill said to us, "Gentlemen," they always called us gentlemen whether we deserved it or not, and usually we didn't. But he said, "Gentlemen, what can we do to make this school better?" Now, keeping in mind that this was shortly after Strake Jesuit had to file bankruptcy because of the Sharpstown scandal and the savings and loan scandals of back then. So he says, "What can we do to make the school better?" Well, the hands flew up. We shouldn't have to wear ties. We shouldn't have to wear blazers. We should do less homework. All these type of things that would make the school better. And Father Mulvihill smiled patiently and then gave this pearl of wisdom. He said, "Gentlemen, you're trying to make your stay here better and more comfortable. We're trying to build a school that you'll send your sons to." Boom, dropped the mic. He could have walked out at that moment. What a powerful statement. When we make decisions, are we making it just to make things easier right now? Or are we really looking forward? That experience for this 16-year-old changed all my perceptions. I butted heads with bosses and said, "Can I tell you about Father Mulvihill?" Because Father Mulvihill's advice was so powerful about, are we making things comfortable? Are we planning for the future? No matter what we do as we make our decisions and encourage other people and look to the short term, look to the long term, part of what makes life wonderful is that we're here to help each other out. How many of you shop at the Kroger at 270 and 518? Okay. Do you know Charles?
Yes.
Okay. Charles, I call him Sir Charles. Sir Charles is a stalker, not stalker, stalker. I have to pronunciate that right. He is a stalker there. And I first encountered Charles about 12 years ago. And you'd walk into the store and his first comment is, "Can I help you find something?" I thought, I guess I have that look in my eye because I must be lost. But he's always cheerful and asks, "Can I help you find something?" And so after a while of this, I realized that this is a guy who does this all the time for everybody, whether he knows people or not. He smiles, he asks, he serves. And if you said, "Charles, I'm looking for a 12-ounce can of sauerkraut," it has to have a nick on the top right-hand corner of the label. Okay? I want a little dust on the top of the shell, on the top of the can to make it look good. And I'd like it to be not quite where it belongs, maybe off to the side. He would probably be able to say, "That's aisle 12, third shelf, 4 feet from the left." He knows where everything is in that store. I wrote about Charles in my first book. I wrote about him in my newsletter, and then I included his story in this book, Listen to Life. And I call him Sir Charles and because of what he does. And I shared the newsletter with his manager and said, "I wrote about Charles. He's a great example for your other employees." Well, then I went back one day and asked Charles, "Have you seen the newsletter?" He said, "No. What are you talking about?" I almost stopped shopping at Kroger because the manager didn't tell the employee that he had been recognized. So instead I wrote the corporate office. And that I got a response on. But I went to Charles and showed him the newsletter and said, "This is what I said about you. Thank you for being you." The next day I go in, he's wearing a new black vest. It says customer service number 1. New black vest. And I walked in, I looked at that and said, "Charles, you're getting up in the world." He points at it and goes, "It's you." He didn't mean me, he meant customers. And I thought, what a wonderful attitude. How can I bottle that and take that to my teams at the university and committees at church and everywhere? Well, the book came out. He's in there. And so I went to the manager and said, "Is Charles here?" And he calls Charles up, and Charles is smiling. And he's walking up, and I hold the book up. And his smile gets huge. And I open it up and hand it to him. I said, "This is you, Charles. Thank you." So he just smiles and he loves it. To me, he is Sir Charles. Now, for several years, I haven't seen Charles. And I was in that parking lot because I'm cheating on him. I'm shopping at a different Kroger. It's a little closer to my house. So I went into that parking lot, and I took care of some business at the postal shop there. And then I was driving by Kroger. I thought, one of these days, I need to go see Charles. He's a great guy. We used to talk about his dad who had passed, his mom who we went to see every Sunday to help. He helped with doing the yard and taking out the trash and just neat stuff. And I miss Charles. So I drove by and I looked at the store and said, "I got to come back." And then I looked over on the left, and who's getting out of his car? It's Charles. I drive past, turn around. He's almost to the door. And I roll down my window and say, "Sir Charles." And he turns slowly, and he's got this huge smile on his face. I get out of the car. I'm ready to block traffic. I don't care. I get out of my car, and we hug in the middle of the parking lot. I said, "It's good to see you." I said, "How's your mom?" He said, "She passed 5 years ago." I said, "Oh my God, how long has it been since I've seen you?" He said, "Too long." And then he grinned and said, "Can I have another copy of that book?" He said, "I gave my copy to Mom and we couldn't find it in her house. She was so proud of me." We are here to encourage each other in any simple way that we can. If we listen to life and listen to what people do and use these things to help each other out. That's what part of what makes life so wonderful. You think of Sir Charles and all these lessons and the 9-year-old and the beach. Okay, all these things make a difference. But along the way, we learn about ourselves too. I was doing workshops for Bay Area Turning Point. I did art workshops with them for years. But the art counselor would have a certain medium that she wanted the clients to work with, and I would help them find the inspiration in their message that they were going to create with and by. And the first project I did with them was second project I did involved photography. And the outcome was so powerful that my office at the university, I'd only been there a few months, but my office, I said, we're sponsoring an exhibition of what you just did, because this is powerful stuff. Well, let me tell you what was so powerful. What happened was we had 3 sessions. One, we're going to talk about basic photographic skills, and then the women would get disposable cameras if they didn't have one of their own, and then they'd go out and take photographs, and the next session we were going to talk about it. The work was so good that we had a 3rd session. What happened at the 2nd session was great, but in particular this story. The woman said, "Here are my 5 photographs. I know they look boring. The first photograph is a bird sitting on a telephone line. Second photograph is that bird sitting on a telephone line. The third photograph is that bird sitting on a telephone line. The 4th photograph is bird sitting on the telephone line." Y'all getting the hang of this. And the 5th photograph shows the bird flying away. She said, "I got to be honest with you, Dion. We went out there and I didn't want to put much effort into this homework assignment. I thought I was going to go out and I'd take a photograph of a bird on a line, boom, bird flying off the line, boom, and I would come in here and say, that was me on the line in a bad relationship, an abusive relationship, and I flew away." It didn't work that way. She said, "My friend and I were out there and we yelled at the bird and we threw things at the bird, and people drove by thinking, what are they doing? But I had to get the photograph of the bird flying away. We did everything we could. We jumped, we shouted, and the bird stayed. Dion, I was at that telephone line for over an hour trying to get that bird to fly away, and then it flew away." And then she said, "And then I realized that really was my story. That people who saw me in the condition and relationship I was in, they were calling out to me, they were throwing rocks at me, they were doing everything they could to get me to fly away, and I wouldn't. It wasn't until I was ready." She said, "That's the real story of my life." And I literally stepped back from the table and said, this has got to be an exhibition. Take these photos, take those stories, and share them with the world. Every time I share that story, there are nods or wet eyes in the audience because somebody realizes the reality of that situation for themselves, somebody in their family. And I know that many people, because I've heard, many people have shared that story with women in their families or friends that they know and said, you need to be the bird. Read the story. I'm not going to pressure you. Read the story about the bird. When we go through life, this wonderful life, this marvelous life, and this collective wisdom, there's a lot of gray hair in this room, okay? And so we've got a lot of experience. And we've got a lot of wisdom. And there are a lot of people who can benefit from that. I was talking to my oldest son. He was in college. We were talking about how some of the professors were doing things. He said, well, you know, Dad, he said, I love to learn. I just don't want to be taught. Sound familiar, doesn't it? We can all relate to that. We love to learn information, but we don't necessarily want somebody teaching us, giving us homework, pounding in information. But those of us who go into life with our eyes and ears open and listen to each other, learn from each other, we're learning every day without being taught. Which leads me to my final story. This guy, 59 years old, was 16 years old working at a grocery store. And I was almost 17. And they were getting ready to change the laws in Texas that said 18-year-olds could drink. And being, ornery, hormone-laden kid, this guy's checking out. This gray-haired guy's checking out. And I said, man, he's buying some beer that was on sale. I said, man, I can't wait till I turn 18. And just as wise and as quiet as you could be, he looked at me and said, son, you're wishing your life away. I don't know who he was, and I'll never forget him. But if we wish to be at any point ahead of where we are right now, we're wishing life away. You may be saying, I wish this guy would shut up and quit talking. Well, you're wishing a few minutes away. You may say, I wish we were at winter. I wish we were at Christmas. I wish I was finished with my last treatment. I wish, anytime we wish to be someplace further ahead, we're wishing part of our life away, part of our opportunity to learn. And I ask and encourage you to share. Because 43 years ago, some man at a grocery store said to a young cashier, don't wish your life away. And ever since that moment, I've tried to remember to be extremely happy for the moment that I'm sitting in right now. And that's the beauty and that's the wonderful part of our lives. Listen to each other, learn from each other, collect the wisdom, but don't forget to share. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dion. He does have a few of his books up here.